We are spending the next few minutes of WGTD's morning show hearing a most intriguing and inspiring story. It's that of Virginia Jacko, whose story is told in a book which she has co-written called The Blind Visionary, Practical Lessons for Meeting Challenges on the Way to a More Fulfilling Life and Career. Virginia Jacko had been a very successful executive at Purdue University when she was given a diagnosis of a very, very serious eye disorder, which was going to slowly but surely rob her of her sight. Amazingly, this story does not end in darkness and despair, but instead, Virginia Jacko has gone on to a new chapter in her life, which has been tremendously meaningful to her and exciting. She is now the CEO of a organization headquartered in Miami that reaches out to the blind in all kinds of amazing ways. And we're going to be talking with her about this personal story and some of the lessons that she has learned along the way on seizing opportunity and forging ahead and finding new joys when it would seem that none were possible. And really inspiring story, again told in this book called The Blind Visionary, co-written by Doug Eady and my guest today, Virginia Jacko. We welcome you to the morning show.
Thank you, Greg. I got to say hello to my mom, who's there at San Camilla's house in Milwaukee. Hi, Mom.
Good. And we should mention that there's at least one very familiar name in this book that we'll get to in just a little bit, a name that will be familiar to Wisconsinites. But let's talk about, first of all, the kind of life that you had before this diagnosis of the eye disorder came your way. Remind our listeners of just what your life felt like before that happened.
Well, I was the financial advisor to the president and provost of Purdue University. I had worked my way up the ladder of the Purdue University business system. And at the same time, I was playing tennis. I had 3 children and still have a wonderful spouse that was so supportive. Back then, when you had the mainframe computing and the printout paper was kind of green and that ink seemed to be getting lighter and lighter, I thought, why don't they change their ribbons more often? Looking back now, I was starting to slowly lose my vision, but I did not know it.
You say that one of the characteristics of this particular disorder, retinitis pigmentosa, is that your vision is robbed from you beginning with the periphery vision, and that it's probably not uncommon to really not fully realize what's going on until suddenly you have a terrible problem on your hands.
You're so correct. It's like a donut hole, and that opening of the donut hole starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller. In contrast, when people have macular degeneration, which many seniors are afflicted with, the good news is they never go totally blind, but the bad news is they start to slowly lose their central vision, and you read with your central vision. So these people feel very blind because they're having trouble reading, but they can slightly turn their head, and then they can watch television or read through the periphery of their vision. However, with the eye disease that I had, I might totally miss someone standing off to my left, miss their handshake, miss their smile, and yet I could sit in a meeting and read a very small print on a spreadsheet.
You call this disease insidious in the way that it moves very slowly but inexorably. And ultimately you had it checked out, of course, and found out exactly what was going on. You tell us, though, in the book that you can count on one hand the number of times you cried through these early days of receiving this diagnosis. That tells us something about the way you're wired.
I guess that's true. It's exhausting to cry. The dog on the cover of my book just passed away, and that was very tough. And my mom said to me, the one in Milwaukee there, didn't you want the ashes? I said, Mom, I'm done crying, and if I take the ashes, that just means I'm going to cry some more. So, no, I don't want the ashes. And so for me, crying is exhausting, and it takes negative energy. And I really like to live with positive energy.
You do mention that for at least a while, you were anxious to try to keep your condition a secret. You weren't sure what this was going to mean to you professionally. And so it was all kinds of things, such as not using a calculator in certain meetings. And, of course, we're talking about meetings in which financial matters were discussed. And
yes,
you had
like with the president and provost. Yeah. Mental math became my hobby, and still to this day, I think I frustrate some sighted people because I am very good with mental math. But as I was losing my vision in a meeting, I didn't want to be holding my head down real close to the printout, the window of the calculator.
Right. You said that you would round up certain important numbers to something that would be a little more workable mentally, and in that way you were ultimately able to function amazingly well. Of course, eventually it became clear that a new direction needed to be taken, and you sought out something located in Miami. Tell us about this lighthouse and what drew you to it.
Well, in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, you have the Badger Center, which is a very good facility. In Miami, we have what's called the Miami Lighthouse for the Blind. It is the first private agency in the United States back in the early 60s to eliminate sheltered workshop employment for the blind and to rehabilitate the blind to remain independent and to be mainstreamed. So, as karma has it, I had a daughter teaching down here at Florida International University, and she received under President Clinton a career award which required collaborating with the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute, Florida National University, and the Miami Lighthouse. And so she got to know about the lighthouse and would say, Mom, when your eyes get bad enough, you really should relocate to Miami. And one day I had a significant emotional event where I realized, you know what? You're screwing up too much, lady. You've got to do things differently, and it's time to learn how to be a blind person and to be the best blind person you can be. And that's when I relocated to Miami.
One of the things that was a bit disconcerting right off the bat is when you were told almost probably on the first day, that you needed to sit down and meet with a social worker. You describe how taken aback you were at that suggestion.
That's correct. You did read the entire book. Thank you for doing that.
That's okay. That helped you realize that this was not just going to be a place where you take a bunch of classes, but you were going to be learning how to rework your life down to some of the smallest and most personal of details.
That is absolutely correct. That's what rehabilitation is. Rehabilitating a person so that, whether it was my area was in vocational rehabilitation, so that I could go back to be employed. Now, I do say to my instructors here, because the computer instructors, they taught me how to use every Microsoft product when I couldn't see the monitor by running another software called JAWS. And I often say to them when I'm doing a tour, you know, guys, if it weren't for you, I would not be president and CEO of Miami Lighthouse, because the computer is so important. I do all my own emails, in my Word documents, get out on the Internet, even spreadsheets. Now, it's tedious when you're blind because you're going to use the arrow key and go cell by cell by cell. That's why I'm fortunate that I once had vision, and I know what that spreadsheet should look like. I know what a balance sheet should look like.
So you have, in a sense, very much a mental template in your mind, and that can serve as a guide and probably saves you a bit of time and trouble.
Yes. My past experience, my executive skills that I gained when I was sighted, a day doesn't go by where I do not think and say to myself something like, no, at Purdue, the president's name was Stephen Beering. What would Stephen Beering do in this situation? You know, what did I do in this situation back at Purdue? And so it's part of our strategic planning, it's part of board governance, it's part of, you know, working with the lobbyists. My past background certainly has helped. And what I really needed to learn how to do was how to do things differently, and that is not using your vision, but the rest of your senses.
It's interesting to read about some of the kinds of everyday activities that you wanted help with, and in some ways not even things that were every day, but in some ways, those are a little simpler matter because they're things you literally do every single day. But things that kind of intermittently come up in the course of one's ordinary life, like on those occasions when you bake cookies or on those occasions when you need to sew on a button. And you had to find new strategies, new means by which to accomplish these kind of tasks, which most of us don't have to think about at all.
I think that your listeners are saying, okay, come on now, how can a blind person sew on a button? And like there at the Badger Center for the Blind, I suspect they have these needles. Even sewing stores have needles where the top is slightly open. You take that needle, you put it in a bar of soap so it's punctured into the soap standing upright. Then you take your thread, you pull it taut, and you force it on that little opening, and then the opening closes, you knot your thread, and away you go. And the rest you do by feel. There's so many different strategies, I love the word that you used, that one can use to just do things differently.
Something which was quite dramatic for you was when somebody made the suggestion that you really should train with a guide dog. And one of the things you tell us is that you had never, ever been a dog person at all before. So this had to be quite a dramatic moment for you in a way that maybe for someone who's been around dogs a lot, it wouldn't necessarily be.
Well, one of the takeaways in my book is act on opportunities. And so when they suggested after I learned how to use the cane, Virginia, you'd be so good with a guide dog. And embarrassingly, I said, a guide dog? I don't even know if I like dogs. Can you imagine now, for me, the greatest gift I've ever received is the guide dog? But it just points out, don't let fear win. Keep things in perspective. And I said, okay, what do I do to get a guide dog? He said, well, you'll have to go to New York to Guiding Eyes for the Blind. You'll stay there for a month. And here's the rest of the story. The dog on the cover of that book just passed away 3 weeks ago. And so now I'm without my guide dog, and I'm back to using the cane. And I like to say, and I might have just said that the cane is an obstacle finder. You've got to find that obstacle, and if you don't, you're in trouble. The dog just avoids obstacles. And so I'm really looking forward to Guiding Eyes bringing me my next guide dog.
I'm sure. I mentioned that there was a familiar name to Wisconsinites in the pages of your book, and it's that of Donna Shalala, who used to be with the University of Wisconsin system and now is with the president of the University of Miami. You mention her name in passing in telling one of your best stories in the book. Would you share at least a part of that story with our listeners?
The Humane Society was having a benefit, and the benefit was a style show for people with their dogs. And they thought, well, this would be great if we had Virginia with her guide dog. I just had gotten my guide dog, and this was in a very large area with 1,000 people watching, and it was on a runway. So the first person down the runway was Donna Shalala with her dog, and of course she's very famous here in Miami and has done so much for the University of Miami. And so, everyone claps for her. Now it's my turn. And before I went down the runway, they had said, now you need to turn to the right at the end. But I knew if I made a right, you need to turn to the left. The dogs work on your left side, so that meant I would be on the outside. And I thought, one bad step, I'm going to step off the runway. So I said, no, could you tell the photographers they need to move over? I'm making a turn to my right because my dog will be on my left side, they always are, and he'll be on the outside, and therefore I won't step off the runway. So it's my turn to go, and I walk up about 5 steps, a typical style show long runway. And I said, Virginia, you've got to do this. You're doing this for the blind. And if you fall off the runway, break a leg, you've done it for the blind. And so I go down the runway, which was about 40 feet long, and I get to the end, and it's time to turn around, and I make that turn, and the dog is perfect. And I am so thrilled. Like my whole energy was like, oh, you did this. You didn't fall off. And I raised my hand up and waved to everybody. Like I was a celebrity, but I really wasn't thinking of myself as a celebrity. I was thinking, you did this. And I waved to everybody, and I got a standing ovation for doing that.
This is a wonderful book and a great, great story. I encourage people to seek out this book called The Blind Visionary, Practical Lessons for Meeting Challenges on the Way to a More Fulfilling Life and Career. co-written by Doug Eady, and my guest today, Virginia Jacko.